We move on to the Game Boy games with a Game Boy version of Battletoads, with only one Toad going up against the forces of the Dark Queen. I would consider this game a superior port to the original NES game. In particular, the game basically puts unlimited continues in the game, and when you continue, you pick up at whatever your last checkpoint was, rather than making you start the level over. This is actually pretty brilliant game design for dealing with the difficulty of a game like this, and it's perfect for a portable game. Next up is a Game Boy version of Kid Icarus, subtitled Of Myths and Monsters, and we have maps of the first 3 stages. This game is actually rather impressive. Kid Icarus, as a title, was all about its verticality. The constant climb ever upwards, never turning back, as dropping back down meant death. This Game Boy version handles the verticality very well, with stages just about as big, maybe a little smaller than the original games, with the added bit that you can actually go back down. This allows for more exploration and examination of the game than the earlier version had, and I do kind of wish the revival of this series on the 3DS had focused more on verticality and exploration than on its Sin and Punishment style gameplay. Next is Faceball 2000, the first first-person shooter we've come across thus far, and also, I believe, the first portable first-person shooter. Faceball is a very basic first-person shooter with some rather ambitious design considering the hardware capabilities of the Game Boy. It's a game where the level geometry is actually kind of polygonal. The game also has a horizontal free look, sort of like Wolfenstein or Doom, and some fairly free movement between the levels, aside from the fact that the levels themselves and the paths in the levels are fairly narrow. The gameplay is fairly simplistic as you're navigating very basic mazes in search of the exit without necessarily the need to find keys or anything like that. Still, the game's controls are very sluggish, likely due to the limitations of the Game Boy hardware. Now, this game gets a Super Nintendo port later, and I'm interested in seeing how that compares to this version. Again, this game is fairly close in terms of gameplay-wise to some of your classic first-person shooters like, again, Doom and Wolfenstein, with the two main differences of the spaces of the levels themselves are much more confined and restricted, and you don't have a weapon selection, really. Continuing with the Game Boy ports of NES games, we have Double Dragon 2. Double Dragon 2 is, in a way, the superior game to the NES title. It changes the plot from the NES and arcade versions with Marion's death, and instead has the dragons framed for the murder of one of the other teachers at the dojo where they work, and them being forced to clear their name on the streets of a very late 70s, early 80s influenced New York. The game also dumps the platforming that caused problems with earlier games, leaving us with a much more conventional brawler, but one which still handles very well, complete with some special moves related to hitting both buttons followed by the punch buttons. I kind of wish that we'd just gotten an attack and a jump button so we could have had dive kicks, but I'm fine with what we got. I consider this to be an underrated gem in the Double Dragon series, and definitely something fans of brawlers should pick up. Wrapping up the Game Boy games, we have Wordzap, or rather Wordzap and Word High, a double puzzle game based around putting together words from letters. These games are the kind of games that I feel are perfect for people who are good at Scrabble or who want to be good at Scrabble. It's a good enough puzzle game, though my Scrabble skills aren't good enough for me to have any particular skill at the game itself. I kind of wish the game had some sort of common names in the dictionary, or for that matter, expanded word list. But otherwise, I'm certain that this game is great. If you're good at Scrabble, you're going to rock at this game. It's not my thing. In the Game Boy Classified Information column, we have a stage select code for the Hunt for Red October. Then we have our Game Boy Coming Soon column with notes on an upcoming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, along with Ninja Gaiden Shadow, Terminator 2, and Hudson Hawk. Moving on to Super Nintendo titles, we have our first SNES tennis game with Super Tennis. This guide gives us a rundown of the playable characters and different courses, different court types and that sort of thing.
Play.
One of the points that is brought up about the Madden games, this particularly came of note because it came up on a episode of the Video Game Years, is that when John Madden got involved in the game's development, he wanted to make sure that this was a game that would help people who didn't understand football understand football. I bring this up because I don't understand how tennis is scored. This game doesn't help me at all understand that. I think I'm scoring points, but apparently I'm not, and I don't really understand why. Other than that, the controls are fine enough. I do have a problem with the camera perspective when the computer is surfing in at the top of the screen while I'm at the bottom. It chops off most of my side of the court, or at least a significant chunk, which makes it difficult for me to judge where the ball is in relation to me and the rest of the court. Next up is UN Squadron, the US home console port of the arcade game Area 88, based off the anime and manga of the same title. The article gives a rundown of the playable characters and the fighters, which are all real-world fighter planes, and notes on several of the levels. Something I share in common with Shinya Arino of Game Center CX is that I am terrible at shoot-em-ups, but I love them anyway. And I love UN Squadron in particular, as when I discovered it, I was getting into anime and manga. I noticed the anime style to it when I first saw the game, and it inspired me to pick it up, at which point I had lots of fun with it. In fact, my enjoyment of the game led to me picking up the anime series later. So, when I came to revisit the game for this review, I will say straight up that the game holds up. It is an incredibly strong shooter. The ability to acquire new aircraft and upgrade them, as well as to choose your power-up loadout, is something which we, aside from Gradius 3, haven't really seen on the SNES. Gradius 3 lets you change your power-up selection, but you didn't have the also ability to switch between multiple different types of fighters, at least not that I recall. We've seen this before in a few titles on the NES as well, but those particularly some shooters from Compile, but not really from the main publishers, not from your Konami, not from your Capcom, and not really from Hudson, who also did some shooters, so it's nice seeing something really different like this. Also, it's a game which bears mentioning. It wears its anime stylings on its sleeve and didn't have them changed for the US release. Didn't have a more anime-style protagonist turned into a more Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone-style protagonist. So that's also very nice. Wrapping up the Super Nintendo titles, we have Super Baseball Simulator 1000, or 1.000. The first baseball game on the Super Nintendo that has been covered thus far. There are notes on stadium types and special moves in the game. And much to my frustration, I was not able to play this game for review, despite all my efforts to find a way to play it, so I can't capture any gameplay footage for it or give any actually informed opinions on the game. Crap it. Anyway, in the now playing column, the NES is getting the Space Shuttle Simulator Space Shuttle Project. I've actually played this game before, though not the NES version of it. My local science museum, OMSI, had the PC version available to play. On the Super Nintendo front, we have more screenshots from Darius Twin and Ultraman. In the top 30 column, The Little Mermaid and Bill and Ted's Excellent Video Game Adventure have entered the list. We've got a moderately big name in our celebrity profile again this issue. We have Robert Englund, who is best known to the world as Freddy Krueger, is profiled. Englund is actually still acting, though he's not doing that many starring roles, primarily doing supporting roles in film and television works. Not as much horror either. Closing out the issue, the Pack Watch column has a look at the upcoming release of Empire Strikes Back for the NES, along with the third Nintendo Wizards and Warriors game. Additionally, the Super Nintendo is getting Lemmings and True Golf Classics. Now, as with last time, I'm doing the obvious pick of the issue and a less obvious pick. The obvious pick for this issue is the cover game, Final Fantasy II, or Final Fantasy IV. It's actually probably easier to find the game now as Final Fantasy IV, since Square Enix has released it a bunch themselves on other platforms, and we don't have to worry about keeping it in numbering with the American NES release. as it is, since the game is available on pretty much every platform, yes, even that one, you can probably go pick up the game right now without any hassle. And I mean, like, any hassle. Like, you could, like, be going onto your smartphone right now while you're watching this episode and downloading it right now. My second pick is UN Squadron. It's a game that holds a special place in my heart, and I'd also honestly consider it one of the best shooters I've covered for the show thus far. If you can find a copy, it's definitely worth picking up. Now, before I go, a little bit of business. On November 7th, 2015, I will be live streaming for 24 hours on Twitch. Currently the plan is Twitch, as part of this year's Extra Life live stream. I will be raising money for Doernbecher Children's Hospital in Portland, Oregon, with all funds being raised going to Doernbecher. There will be a link in the show notes where you can donate. This whole thing is through the Children's Miracle Network as well, so if you are going to donate, check with your workplace, your HR department, whatever, as some employers do a matching dollar thing, and while donating $10 is great, if you can get your employer to donate an additional $10, that's even better. It helps more people. So, check the link, donate a few bucks, so that when you're telling people you're doing good, you can not only be factually correct, but also grammatically correct. Yeah, I think that's how that works. Anyway, if you also want to toss a little money my way to help support the show, please check out my show's Patreon page, link also below. For a few bucks a month, you can help support me making shows like this, possibly even help me improve the quality of the show, and also get your name in the credits. So, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.